The first time I opened my husband's desk drawer after he died, I found a photograph of a woman I had never seen before. I was 89 years old, and my husband had been buried for exactly 11 days. The photograph was black and white. The edges had curled with age. A young woman stood beside a lake, wearing a light-colored dress and smiling directly at whoever was holding the camera. On the back, in my husband's handwriting, were 4 words. July 14, 1958. My Anna. My name was Margaret. If you stay with me, I will tell you what 47 years of marriage taught me about betrayal, secrets, and the dangerous things we assume simply because we have shared a bed with someone for a long time. I know this because I washed Thomas's shirts for almost half a century, slept beside him through thousands of nights, raised 2 children with him, held his hand in hospital rooms, and still did not know the name that had been written inside his heart before mine. I thought betrayal had to be loud. A slammed door. A lipstick stain. A suitcase by the stairs. I was wrong. Sometimes betrayal is a photograph hidden inside a drawer you never thought to open. Thomas and I married on September 3, 1966. I was 42 minutes late to my own wedding because my sister had forgotten the flowers at home. Thomas stood outside the church wearing a gray suit that was slightly too large for him. When I finally arrived, breathless and embarrassed, he laughed and whispered, "I was beginning to think you had changed your mind." For 47 years, I remembered that sentence as a joke. After finding the photograph, I remembered it differently. Perhaps that is the cruelest thing about discovering a secret late in life. The past doesn't disappear. It rearranges itself. In the beginning, Thomas was a good husband. That is important for me to say. He worked hard. He never gambled. He did not drink himself into anger. He repaired the kitchen sink when it leaked and brought home roses every February, although he always complained about how much they cost. We had 2 children, Michael in 1970 and Susan in 1974. From the outside, we looked ordinary. And ordinary can be very convincing. At 7:10 every morning, Thomas left for work. At 5:45, he usually returned. On Sundays, he cut the grass. Every Christmas Eve, he fell asleep in the armchair before midnight. I knew the shape of his hands. I knew that he hated mushrooms and always removed them from soup. I knew he hummed when he was worried. I knew that when he lied, he scratched the side of his nose. Or at least, I thought I knew when he lied. There was one thing he did every year that I never questioned. On July 14th, Thomas disappeared for several hours. The first year, he said he was visiting an old friend. The second year, he said he had some work to finish. Later, he stopped explaining. By then, I had learned one of the quiet rules of our marriage. Thomas liked certain parts of his life to remain his own. I told myself that was normal. Everyone deserves privacy. That was the word I used. Privacy. I did not use the other word. Distance. There is a difference. I understand that now. When I was 51, I found a receipt in Thomas's jacket pocket. It was from a restaurant 23 miles from our house. Dinner for 2. July 14th. I remember standing beside the washing machine with the receipt between my fingers. The machine was shaking so hard during the spin cycle that the bottles of detergent rattled against the wall. When Thomas came home, I placed the receipt on the kitchen table. "What is this?" He looked at it for less than a second. Then he said, "Business." "For 2 people?" He removed his glasses. "Yes." "With whom?" "A client." "What client?" He looked tired. That was his talent. Thomas could make my questions feel like a burden. "Margaret," he said quietly, "do we really need to do this?" I wish I could tell you that I demanded an answer. I didn't. I folded the receipt and threw it away. That night, I lay beside him while he slept. I stared at the ceiling. And I chose peace. At least, that is what I called it. But peace is not always peace. Sometimes it is fear wearing a softer name. I was afraid that if I asked another question, I might hear an answer I could not survive. So I stayed silent. By the time Thomas turned 70, his health had begun to fail. First his heart. Then his kidneys. Then his legs became weak. I took him to appointments. I measured his medication. I helped him button his shirts when his fingers became stiff. There is something strange about caring for a person who has hurt you without knowing that you know. You become both tender and suspicious. Some nights, Thomas would wake at 3 o'clock in the morning. He would sit on the edge of the bed and stare toward the window. "What are you thinking about?" I once asked. He turned toward me. "Old things." "What old things?" He smiled. "The kind you don't need to worry about." And once again, I let him keep them. At 87, I had become too old for arguments that had no beginning and no proof. Or so I thought. Then Thomas died on a Thursday morning in November. The nurse had opened the blinds just after sunrise. The room was pale and cold. Thomas looked smaller than he had ever looked in life. I held his hand. For a few seconds, his eyes opened. I leaned closer. "I'm here." His lips moved. I thought he was saying my name. But he wasn't. He whispered one word. "Anna." Then he was gone. I stood beside his bed for a long time. The nurse asked if I wanted to sit down. I said no. I had spent 47 years standing beside that man. I could stand another minute. 11 days after his funeral, I found the photograph. Behind it was a bundle of letters tied with a blue ribbon. There were 32 letters. All from Anna. The first was dated June 1957. The last was dated August 1965. I sat on the floor beside Thomas's desk and read them. Anna had been his first love. They had met when they were 19. They had planned to marry. Then her father got sick, and her family moved across the country. At first, they wrote. Then less often. Then not at all. But one letter stopped me. It was dated July 18, 1965. Only 14 months before Thomas and I met. Thomas had written Anna asking her to marry him. She had never answered. Not because she didn't love him. Because she had already married someone else. At the bottom of her final letter, she wrote, "By the time I received your letter, I was already someone's wife. I am sorry, Thomas. Some doors close while we are still standing in front of them." I read that sentence 5 times. Then I found something else. A small envelope. Inside was a letter from Thomas to Anna. It had never been sent. The paper was yellow and folded into quarters. The first line read, "I met a woman named Margaret. She is kind to me, and I think I could build a life with her." I stopped breathing for a moment. Not because of what he wrote next. Because of what he didn't. He did not write that he loved me. He wrote that he could build a life with me. And he did. We built one. Brick by brick. Bill by bill. Child by child. Year by year. But suddenly I wondered whether a life built after a closed door could ever feel like the first choice. That question kept me awake for 3 nights. On the 4th day, I called my son. I told him about Anna. There was a long silence. Then Michael said, "Mom, Dad loved you." "You don't know that." "Yes, I do." "How?" He hesitated. Then he said, "Because when I was 15, I found one of those letters." My hand tightened around the phone. "What?" I asked him who Anna was. I could hear Michael breathing. And what did he say? He said, she was the life I thought I wanted. I closed my eyes. And then? Michael's voice became quieter. He said, your mother was the life I didn't know I needed. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Then Michael said, Mom, I always thought that was romantic. I looked at Thomas's empty chair. No, I said. It isn't romantic when you're the person sitting across from him and you don't know the sentence exists. That was the truth. Love can be real and still leave someone wounded. A person can choose you every morning and still carry someone else somewhere inside them. I had spent days trying to decide whether that meant Thomas had betrayed me. Then, 2 weeks later, there was a knock at my front door. It was Anna. She was 88. She stood on my porch wearing a dark blue coat and holding a small handbag with both hands. For 1 second, I hated her. Then I saw her face. Old. Tired. Afraid. Just like mine. Are you Margaret? She asked. I nodded. My name is Anna. I know. She looked down. I heard Thomas died. Of course she had. She had probably known every year. Maybe every July 14th. I wanted to ask her everything. Did she meet him? Did she still love him? Was she the woman from the restaurant receipt? Instead, I stepped aside. Come in. We sat at my kitchen table. The same table where I had thrown away that receipt 38 years earlier. Anna held her cup of tea but didn't drink it. Finally, she said, I never saw him again. I looked at her. Never? Not once. Then why July 14th? She smiled sadly. That was the day we first met. My throat tightened. He went somewhere every year. I know. How? Because he wrote to me. My heart stopped. Then she quickly shook her head. Not letters. He sent nothing. She opened her handbag. Inside was a small notebook. Thomas gave this to me in 1964, she said. Before I married. The first page contained a list of dates. July 14th, 1965. July 14th, 1966. July 14th, 1967. Year after year. Until 2013. Each date had the same 2 words beside it. Still here. I stared at the page. What does that mean? Anna's eyes filled with tears. He told me once that if we couldn't have the life we imagined, he would spend 1 day each year remembering that it had existed. I felt anger rise inside me. While he was married to me? Anna looked directly at me. Yes. The honesty of that answer hurt more than any excuse. Then she reached across the table and touched my hand. I almost pulled away. But I didn't. He loved you, Margaret. You don't know that. I do. How? Anna looked toward the window. Because I spent years being jealous of you. That was not the answer I expected. She continued. He wrote nothing. He visited nowhere. He kept no photographs of you because he didn't need to. You were his real life. You were the person who knew what he looked like when he was sick. You knew his children. You knew what frightened him. I wanted to believe her. But belief is not the same as forgiveness. Then Anna said something I have carried with me ever since. Thomas and I loved an idea. You and Thomas survived reality. And there it was. The thing I had not understood. I had spent my marriage competing with a ghost I didn't know existed. But perhaps Thomas had been competing too. Between the life he imagined at 19 and the life he actually lived. The tragedy was that neither of us had spoken honestly enough. Not Thomas. Not me. I had ignored the receipt. The absences. The silences. I called my silence peace. But it was fear. Thomas called his silence protection. But it was fear too. We had both protected our marriage from the truth until there was no time left to use it. That afternoon, Anna left before sunset. At the door, she turned around. "I am sorry." I nodded. So was I. Not because I had loved Thomas. Not because I had stayed. I was sorry for all the questions I had swallowed because I was afraid of the answers. That was my regret. Not that my husband had once loved another woman. People have histories. People carry old names. The regret was believing that asking an honest question could destroy what silence was already slowly weakening. If you are listening to me now, perhaps there is something you have noticed but never asked about. A name. A distance. A missing hour. A look that changes when a certain subject is mentioned. You may tell yourself that asking will only create trouble. Maybe it will. But there is a difference between creating trouble and uncovering it. I learned that at 89, with a photograph in my hands and a dead man who could no longer answer me. That is too late. Sometimes the most expensive thing in a marriage is not betrayal. It is the years you spend pretending you don't see the door that keeps opening and closing. I still have the photograph of Anna. For a long time, I wanted to burn it. Instead, I placed it back in Thomas's desk. Not hidden. Not locked. Just there. Every July 14th, I make myself a cup of coffee and sit at the kitchen table. The same table. The same window. The same chair where Thomas once sat across from me. I no longer wonder whether I was his first choice. At 89, I have finally learned that being chosen is not the only question. The better question is this: were we honest enough to let each other be known? Thomas and I loved each other. I believe that now. But love was not the part we failed at. Truth was. And sometimes, after 47 years, that is the secret that remains. Not the name you find in the drawer. The question you were too afraid to ask. Ask while they can still answer.